Hello, this is going to be Photoshop Retouching 101. Okay, so what I want you to do is go to your Canvas site, and you're going to download the Photoshop zip folder. And you'll go to your class assignments, Photoshop zip folder, and then once it downloads down here, you can right click Show in Finder, and you can drag it to the desktop, double click it, and it's going to make this folder right here Photoshop. It made another one called Photoshop 2 because this one was already unzipped, and I can just throw these away, and we'll take this folder, the Photoshop folder, that's got these things in here, which I'm going to show you how to do each one of these. Take this Photoshop folder and drag it to the graphic design folder, and if you look in there, you have all your organized projects that you've been working on. So we'll go into the Photoshop folder, and we're going to open up this one, our first retouching file, Face Retouch. Let me close some of these other things here to get them out of our way. And then what you want to do with Face Retouch is open it in Photoshop. So the way you do that is you take it and you just drag it to the Photoshop icon on your dock down here. I already have it open in Photoshop and done a little bit of retouching just so I can show you the before and after. Now the one thing to remember, I'm going to show you a couple of things. Well, when we get into it I'll show you, but whenever you show your client a project that you did retouching, make sure to only show them the retouching. Okay, you don't want to start with this is the way you looked before and this is the way you look after I did all my magic. You don't want them to think, oh man, I look terrible, and then they're like, oh, I could only look good after you did all this stuff. So you want your client to think, hey, I look great. Some of the techniques I did on here, I don't want you to really do in the real world, but just for lesson purposes, some of the tools I want you to use. I just want you to teach you the tools, but in the real world, things like moles, scarring, facial features that are there permanently, we don't want to retouch those away. But these little spots on our face make a perfect way to explain and show you some of these retouching tools. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to revert this one so that we can go back to the original. So the first thing I want you to do is we're going to crop. So we're going to go to the rectangular marquee tool, and we're going to select our entire photo, and I'm also going to see if I can expand Photoshop here. Okay, that's pretty good. So we have this selected, and we're going to crop it. There's another crop tool right here where you can do almost all of it at the same time, but I'm showing you the old-fashioned way here. You take your marching ant trail and you go to Image and then Crop. So we just crop it. But like I said, you could use the crop tool, which is interesting because it brings up the rule of thirds. We'll talk about that later. So now we have this picture cropped. And the one thing I like to do is things that are non-destructive. So we don't want to damage this original photo. We may have to get back to it at some point. So we will make a duplicate of this background layer, and you can right click and hit duplicate, or you can hit Command J on the keyboard. And that makes a copy of it. And you can turn the eyeball off on the background copy. Then I'm going to go to these retouching tools, like the spot healing tool, and you try to get your brush, you can use right bracket, left bracket, try to get your brush a little bit bigger than the problem area. Just click on those and make those go away. And like I said, usually you're not going to get rid of moles. Your client may say, get rid of my moles, please. And then you will. But if they don't say anything, you're not going to get away, you're not going to take away a distinguishing look on them, especially with high-end models. Sometimes that mole, like Cindy Crawford, is part of her trademark. Okay, so we got rid of some of the blemishes here on her face, and now I'm going to show you the non-destructive dodge and burn. So let's go down here. These are your adjustment layers, so we can make an adjustment layer. We're going to do the brightness contrast, and sometimes I do the burn first, and then sometimes I do the dodge, which is the lighten first. It just kind of depends on how I'm feeling it. But today I'm going to show you the brightness first, so you can take your brightness up. Don't take it too bright because it makes it hard to see what you're working with. But you can take your brightness maybe somewhere right in the middle, and everywhere you see bright spots on the hair, on the eyes, a little glow on the lips, everywhere you see a bright spot, you're going to try to enhance that using a adjustment layer and the layer mask. So let me go to a brush here, and you try to size up your brush so you be about the size of whatever you're trying to paint in. Right now, see, the mask is white, and I'm painting white on it, so I don't see what I'm doing at all. So let me change it to black, and I'm going to paint in some of these highlights here. Right there, right there. And you're like, Mr. Glenn, this isn't highlighting, this is darkening. And it sure is. It's not actually darkening, it's taking it back to what the original color was. But as soon as you invert this layer, Command I, you'll see your highlights come through. But I'm just doing this just so I can see the highlights that I've already highlighted. And I'm just going to do this real roughly just so you can see the technique. Normally I would do a lot better on clothing. This technique looks real good. Oops, my brush is probably too big for some of this, and I'll get in there and enhance some of the brightness on these things. A few strands up here. Okay, so you see how that works here. Let me brighten around there, a little highlight on the eye, there, and a little bit underneath there. And I usually like to do the end of the nose here. So now I'm going to invert that, Command I, and invert it. And for sure you don't want it to look like that, so now you use a balance between opacity. I bring down my opacity on this brightness layer. And you can also lower your brightness up here. Okay, so you can use opacity and your brightness control. Let's do one more here. Let's do the burn. This is the darken. So we'll take this and we'll take it to darken it. And then I'm going to make sure I'm painting with black, and I'm going to find these areas of darkness. I usually like to do a kind of a dark shadow underneath the chin. Like I said, I'm doing this pretty sloppy just to show you the technique, just to show you the tools. I usually like to do right where I brightened. If there's a shadow, I like doing my dark right next to where I just did a bright. it increases the contrast. I got this down here, make that a little darker. Down here, inside the mouth. I know you're like, it doesn't look darker, it's brighter. Be careful around the nose. You don't want to make the nose look too messed up. We're just trying to increase contrast. Now I'm going to see if I can darken up those pupils a little bit, maybe a little bit around the iris, maybe the eyebrows, a little bit in the hair. Okay, so now I'm going to invert that, and then you need to take its opacity down. Adjust the brightness here, and then you can turn these on and off to see how you're doing. Okay, I need to do a little bit of tweaking on this, but there's no reason for you to watch me do every little thing. And so we got this, we got our brightness, contrast. This one is our dodge layer. This one is our burn layer, and we can name those. Dodge, burn. So let's do, I want to do a little trick on the eye. Let's do some, I call it the eye gleam. Eye gleam. So let's zoom in on the eyes here, and then I'm going to take the elliptical marquee tool and get a elliptical marquee that's roughly the size of the eye, and we're on the eye gleam layer, and we're going to just fill that with white. Then I'm going to take another elliptical marquee and delete the top part. I don't like that one. Let me just try this again here. I'm going to try one that's a little bit more curved, and we're going to make a crescent moon shape. Okay, that one's not bad. Usually I don't like to use the eraser, but I'm going to use the eraser to shape it a little bit. But before I do that, I'm going to just make a duplicate, alt-click and drag for the one on the other eye, and then I'll just I'm going to do them both at the same time so I can merge down so that both gleams are on the same layer. So now I'm going to use, usually don't like using the eraser, I like using layer mask, but for this little quick thing I'm going to shape these just a little bit. I don't like to be too pointy on the end. It looks fake when that happens. So I got the ends shaped a little bit here, so we have that. And everybody likes to do the little gleams kind of their own way. I'm just showing you the way that I like to do it. And you can put it on all these, in between these two lines here, here, and here. All this is darkened. In between this line and this line, all these things are lightened. So we can try lighten, or screen, or color dots, or some of these other things. Sometimes I like to try soft light, and this one soft light looks pretty good. So I'm going to take soft light, and I will lower its opacity. The one thing I did notice that this one is a little bit lower than this one. So I'm going to take my marquee and my move tool, and I'm going to just see if I can shift this one up a little bit so I can match what's going on the other one. And it's on, that one part is on the iris. You probably wouldn't have a gleam, I'm sorry, on the pupil. Probably wouldn't have a gleam on the pupil itself. So now I'm going to lower the opacity maybe a little bit more. So now we got a nice little gleam. The other thing I like to do, almost always do Gaussian blur on these retouching techniques. And just a little tiny bit of Gaussian blur. Just a little tiny bit, maybe even less than 0.6. Okay, so there's our little gleam of the eyes, and that looks pretty good. So I'm happy with that. And you can kind of see how we're doing by turning those eyeballs off and turning them back on, and pretty good. And let me just show you one more very old-fashioned technique here, and I'm going to turn everything off. I'm going to go to the background layer, and I'm going to take the eyedropper tool and select the color of this flesh here. Find a nice medium tone for this flesh color. Then I'm going to go to select color range, and I'm going to select the face, and it's selecting so much of the other part of the image, but that's okay. So as long as I get all that flesh, I'm going to pick right there. I have most of the face, and I'm going to eyeball everything else off except for the layer that I want to copy from. I'm going to hit Control C, Control V, and there is the copy of that. Like I said, normally I use the layer mask, but for this layer here, I'm just going to use the eraser. If you've been in my classes before, you know how I preach the layer mask. But for some of this retouching, the eraser is just as good. That right there, we don't need that. I'm going to make my brush smaller. I don't need to do this technique to the eyes at all. So that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to take this, I'm going to do the Gaussian blur, and this I will do quite a bit more. And this is like, we're going to give the flesh tone just a soft focus. And this is a very old-fashioned technique, but it works real good on people with a lot of blemishes, and the skin, it makes the skin real smooth. And if you do it right, no one will ever notice what you're doing at all. So I'm going to turn everything else back on. Obviously, this is way too much. So you take the opacity and you lower it until it starts to appear natural. Maybe something like that. And then you'll want to go in and either with an eraser or the layer mask and kind of fine-tune some of these edges just so it's not so noticeable. And definitely don't want to blur the eyes. You want your eyes to be nice and sharp. Okay, so something like that. And then we're going to go to one more adjustment layer, my favorite one, curves. And I usually always start with the medium contrast and just see what it looks like. Looks pretty good, but it looks like it bumped up the red. So you can always take the red curve and bring it down just a little bit here. So we got our curves. I usually like to start, like I said, with the medium contrast, and if I'm getting enough contrast, that's good. If I'm not, I'll need to do increase, or I can do a lighter contrast, like the linear contrast. This one is contrasted too much, but it's contrasting the way that I like. So I'm going to take my opacity down and just get a more subtle contrast. Now I'm a big believer in curves. That's more of the professional tool, but some people like to use this other one called levels. So you could use levels on this one too, and you can see right here that there's no darks in this range right here, so you can amplify the way that your picture looks by taking your darks right where the darks actually start. And some people may say that they start right there, but I'm going to just assume that they're right there. Just be careful not to go into here, because then you're clipping off some of your darks. This all the way from here over, you can't see this. All those colors will be hidden in the shadow. So then we take it right there, and that's our levels. So it makes the colors kind of pop a little more, and our curves helps a little bit more too. And then lastly, what I want you to do is click on this top layer, hold Command, Alt, Shift, and the letter E, and it makes a composite layer of all the layers that have the eyeball on the top, and then you can see your before and then your after. And like I said, make sure to show your client the after. I did notice that the focus looks a little bit too soft on her flesh tone. I would probably fix that. But the eyes look pretty good, hair looks pretty good. This is not too bad a retouching. And also, I wanted to remind you, moles are not things you want to retouch and take away. I just showed you how to use this one tool, the spot healing tool, to get rid of some of these things. But normally moles and scars you don't want to get rid of. You want to keep that. That's distinguishing features about your model that you probably do not want to take away. So that is Retouching 101, and that concludes this tutorial. Thank you for watching.